live from the studio audiences. Dave, how are
Hey,
you?
welcome. Good
It's
morning, afternoon, whatever it is. I don't know.
it's office hours. It's
Yes.
office hours. It's office hours. Welcome everybody to Office Hours, our weekly lifeline call-in show for the fractional world and all things the new normal. Typically, not even typically, but sometimes we have music on the top, but we don't have any music today. I think we have to think
I'm
about
gonna get
that.
my stuff together a little better on that.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't want. What do you play? It's what do you have a license to, and what is the right music for this
Right.
ragtag band of hooligans we have here?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know.
Lori, what would you want to be your play on music? I'll hum a few bars.
I don't know. For some reason, I'm thinking dueling banjos.
There we go. Love it. That would be ideal. So, well, welcome to another episode, everybody. For those listening live, for those tuning in later, for those coming and going, our hope and our dream is to share thoughts and insights and opportunities and brain power of what's going on in the new normal, specifically with small business, specifically with fractional professionals, specifically with the talent world. It's all different now, right? It's all changed, and we're sort of journeying forth in a new frontier of work, and our hope is to open the aperture on that. With us today is Lori. We're super happy to have you here, and I think usually I like, well, here's where she comes from, and here's the thing, and all that. But I'm actually going to say, hey, you know what? Our guest is the author of Protege Power, and here's why I'm going to have you introduce yourself, because I'm going to say Lori Crever. Did I get it right?
Yes, absolutely. It's like Beaver Cleaver, but with an R.
There's something about your name that makes me want to say Crever. Now, maybe it's French.
It is French. You're right. And I think that the root, for those of you that have a lot of experience with Latin and Romance languages, I think the root is crever, which means puncture.
Ooh.
Like flat tire.
Mm-hmm.
You never know. So author, professional, talks about so many things, diversity and mentoring, which I think we're going to talk about today, Protege, and so many other things. I think kind of as it relates to culture and work and other things sort of wrapped around that. So Lori, welcome to the show.
I'm so delighted to be here.
We're delighted you're delighted. We're delighted you're delighted. So let's start with the fun stuff. You got this wonderful suitcase on your cover. It's there's a story there. Talk about you and talk about your book. Let's hear it. Why'd you do it?
Well, it was not my idea to write a book. I worked in corporate America. I worked in international banking for 2 decades. I was not a banker. I wouldn't really say that Excel spreadsheets are my love language, if you're a Gary Chapman book fan. So I was doing employee engagement. One of the things I did was I started and ran a mentor program. I was assigned to do this. And I really used my humanities, arts, theater background to spend time getting to know each incoming mentee so that I could do a really swell job of matching them with the right mentor, and then getting them up and running and surveying the participants. How's it going? What could we do to improve your program experience and opportunity for growth, et cetera? So I got to be famous inside my corporation for running finally a successful mentor program, because we did a study and about 88% of our program graduates were seeing a really substantial upsurge in their career, salary, level of responsibility, all of that. And so people started inviting me to speak and talk about our best practices. And that became a book, because people would say, gosh, you have some great stories. And just working with different cultures, because I was an international, people would say you should write a book. And then in the spirit of this audience and fractional, I got laid off 5 years ago. And while I had started the book, getting laid off allowed me to do more skullduggery and finish the books.
That's a great word, skullduggery.
Yes.
It's like shenanigans, and that sort of thing. So you have this wonderful foundation of matching, wisdom with new energy. Mentorship is that, I think if we could boil it down, it's kind of the idea, right? How do the smart people and who have been around and suffered and learned and had huge successes and huge failures, how do you sort of take that next wave and have that come together? It's changed, right? We face this in Voyager all the time. Is we've got this huge repository of fractional professionals. They have all this massive amount of wisdom, right? 189 as of today. And yeah, exactly. But guess what? They're not all at your old bank. They're not all in a building. It's so different. What do you think of all that? We're not going to go back to the office to do it. How do we mentor in a not just a virtual way, but sort of in the new normal?
Yeah. I really feel every one of us in our own way is being called to gain, is this a new word now? Nimbility?
It is today.
A quality of nimbleness.
Yeah.
And speaking frankly for myself,
Mm-hmm.
super bummer. I mean, just one example. I published my book the second half of 2021. I thought I had done appropriate homework. I'm in the state of Minnesota.
Yep.
On how much and how to collect sales tax for selling my book to somebody who lives in Minnesota. Without getting into a lot of detail,
Mhm.
I was wrong. And so now I'm getting much more deeply educated on
Mhm.
how to calculate and report sales tax. And I'm resisting it because I'm like, why? I believe in simplicity. Why me? Why did I have, I always said, like, why did I have this book? Because sometimes I say it's like having a baby,
Yeah.
But guess what? Get with the program, girlfriend.
Yeah.
Got to be nimble, got to be a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
And
That's
I'm
true.
just saying, like, in the spirit of this webcast, office hours, the hooliganery of what we're delivering to you today, we're with you because it ain't easy. So that's not the message, is that this is easy in this era. It's not, but we can find support like in this program.
Yeah. What we say about Voyager, there's a lot of things we say about Voyager, but the community is a place to help and be helped in that order.
Yeah.
In that order. And that it's interesting because that never goes away, right? Like 20 years ago, or how long ago was it when you first started the program at the corporation? How many years ago was that?
Year 2000.
The year 2000. So 22 years ago. It's different, right? Go into buildings, commute to a place, thousands of people go into the place. Most people are W-2 employees. That was kind of normal for about 75 years. And then this little thing called COVID happened and kind of changed everything. It shook things up. And now you've got a totally different scenario, logistically speaking. But here's what's interesting to me is the desire to give, to teach, to help, to mentor, I think is stronger than ever.
Yeah, we need connection.
Yeah.
Especially as we're all home-based.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I agree with something else that you said, John, which is, once you've had some experiences and earned your battle scars, most of us as humans, we would relish the opportunity to help someone who's up and coming to avoid those massive pitfalls, those errors that we made, the blind spots that we had. I was just talking with someone today. Remember when email was introduced into the work environment? We had to create this whole other etiquette. Remember how long it took us to learn? Don't always hit reply all.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Oh my God.
How many times? Now, Lori, it's actually really weird because we have very parallel career paths. I'm just realizing this now. I ran communications at another big bank that was across the street from you. And I was actually doing the internal mentoring program from like 2004 to 2007 over there as part of corporate communications. So it's fascinating how many facets as you went through, like when I was starting in like 99 at and when I was starting over there, I was part of the communications program, and we would get people that would copy all on emails all the time and going out to 32,000 people. And at one point, somebody sent me an email of a person who was skydiving naked, and there were lots of things that were flapping very aggressively.
Oh
And
gosh.
somehow they sent that to the head of corporate communications. I was
Oh
like,
gosh.
no, you might not want to have that out to the world. So it just learning all of this stuff, we're in a constant state of change, and learning and realizing how to make personal connections now, I think, is the
Yeah.
big challenge.
And what
So
does culture mean with
yeah.
that? When you that what you just described, Dave, I think that was an episode of The Office as well. Somebody must have picked up on that story. It's very, very close to that. But what digital has meant to the workforce probably has had a greater effect on culture than we realize.
Mhm.
Definitely.
If you go back to, what would you say, Dave,
Definitely.
1999, like, hey, don't
Yeah.
reply all,
Mhm.
especially on naked skydiving or
Mhm.
whatever it is.
Mhm.
Lori, how has I want to talk about mentoring. I want to talk about corporate culture. I want to talk about so many things. So I'm going to take them in bits and pieces. Let's start with talk about how culture is different and has changed in this new normal of remote, independent, fractional, whatever we're calling it in the last 2 years, and what it's created for this American economy. How has culture changed?
Well, there is a wonderful researcher from Europe that possibly some of the listeners have heard of. He's just passed away in the last couple of years, Geert Hofstede.
Hmm.
And he's noted for saying that culture is the software of the mind, right?
Hmm.
And I
Interesting.
think so many of our, like I would say, email was a culture piece that got introduced into our work world that was just like a software to download. But now, post COVID,
Mhm.
and being in the hybrid or largely remote, or so many of us being fractional,
Yeah.
don't you think that isn't just mere software? That's a culture shift. That's like operating system. It's like we are completely swapping out.
Whole new OS.
Or
Oh
maybe
my
even
gosh.
like it's like the difference between PCs and now mobile devices, right? Where it might be a similar operating system, but there's an entirely different mobility to it. There's an entirely different access and a lot of limitations that you don't have any other way. Like you don't have this big, huge, wide PC screen. You only have 4 inches, but you're always on.
Yeah.
So
It's that dramatic of a shift.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love it.
Wow. So because we're talking about that, there was a individual that we may all have heard about this week. His name is Elon Musk. And Elon had something to say this week as it goes to culture. He said, if you do not show back up at the office, we will assume you have resigned. He's talking to his Tesla
Yeah.
employees. We will assume you have resigned and get your ass in here. And you can work remote as long as you put in a 40-hour at the office work week first. Lori, I got to hear your viewpoint on what does that say about culture? What does that mean? Where is he going? Where are we where things like this are out there and normalized?
Well, to me, I like to have a mindset of abundance.
Mhm.
And so I like to imagine if you are employed by Elon Musk and you cannot play ball with what he's asking,
Mhm.
that you can go find a different job. Now, I
Correct.
was raised by a carpenter and a nurse,
Mhm.
remote schmote. Like
Yeah.
my dad
Yep.
was the carpenter. He had to
Mhm.
go to the job site and
Yep.
drive there at 5 a.m, even when it was January in Minnesota. My mom
Mhm.
Right.
was an operating room nurse.
Mhm.
Boom, on call in the middle of the night. Go. I mean, this wasn't not all jobs are remote.
Yeah.
But I think, as staff, as employees, I feel like we can have a lot of influence on the culture of our workplace. And I really encourage that for people. Now, at my bank, which I won't say the name,
Mhm.
not that it's top secret, the icon is a stagecoach, but I brought steadily a lot of poetry and musical comedy and you name it.
Mhm.
In fact, I might still be the only employee in that whole 170-year history who purchased a feather boa and expensed it. And it was a valid business expense. That's how I rolled.
I like it.
And I tell some of these stories in the book of like, if you see something in your organization, I call an unmanned battle station, and you think, hey, I'm the person who could claim this and take ownership and then be able to describe to your bosses how this would be a betterment for your company. Guess what? That's how a lot of people's job evolves.
Sure.
Just over time, if you can be what's called a utility player,
Mhm.
we all have a junk drawer or a room.
Mhm.
Dare I say, John, not trying to call you out, you're sitting in a utility room right now.
I am. Look at this.
Like,
It's insanity.
stuff is just being thrown in there.
It's
That's
college.
okay.
It's a college age kid. I have become his utility room, but only for 2 more weeks.
Only for 2 more weeks. So, that's cool. Can you be a utility player within your work environment and help to influence and shift the culture? And then, of course, if you really feel like it's just too many barriers, then I feel the reward for that organization should be that you, as a talent, leave.
Yeah.
I
Ooh.
really feel strongly about a positive culture for us, for the workers, for the staff, and they're out there. And
Yeah.
it's such a workers, advantage
2 for 1 right
right
now, isn't it? Isn't it 2
Yes,
for 1
let's
for every?
compel these decision makers to be committed to a positive work culture. Absolutely.
I think some people are struggling with that. It's sort of with the belief for every person, there's 2 jobs up and down the economy, right? Executive jobs, non-executive jobs. It's I think we're at 2 for 1 right now. So obviously it favors the worker. So to come out, obviously, if you don't want to work for Tesla under those roles, you can go down the street and work for Toyota or Ford, or just get out of that industry altogether. If you don't like that. A good friend, Mike Moore, who's a fractional marketing dude, I sent a little post out this morning. I'm like, just to the Voyager community, aren't you glad? Regardless of how you feel about that, aren't you glad you're not in that world where that had to come across your desk and you had to think about that? Aren't you happier to be, I'm fractional, I'm helping a client, we're growing, I'm helping them grow. Yeah. That's in a different world now. And
you are so right, John. That was pretty sassy of him. And I think probably you and Dave and I and the watchers, listeners can make a prediction here that Elon Musk message will probably show up in a business school case study on how not to lead.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Thumb down, Dave.
Yep. There's a lot of things that's going to happen as part of that tweet that our resident goofball Musk did. I think everybody else in the Valley, in Silicon Valley, is cheering because they just got a sweet deal on all kinds of wonderful Tesla employees that aren't going to put up with it and are just going to go work for someplace that is virtual. I represent Google on a number of things. I'm a speaker and trainer for them. They're still completely virtual and they have no intention of going back in the near term. For anybody that's non-essential. Target, local corporation here in Minneapolis, they announced anybody who doesn't need to be in the office, you keep working from home if you want to. We're not going to force you to come in. That's a big deal for all the big operation centers, and certainly for downtown, that's a tough blow. But man, for people that want to just live their lives and hang out, I think it's going to be huge.
Airbnb said he never had to come back. I was super happy to see Google do that. And I think it comes to, speaking of culture, I think it comes to a recognition of where the value is. For Airbnb and Google to say that, I think it's another way of saying our value is in you. So you do things your way to the best of what makes you happy, and do your best and keeps you fulfilled and makes you a whole human being. If that's what it is, then our value is in a really happy and healthy you. It's a recognition of that, right? The flip side is our value is you coming in to do things my way, our way, because I did it this way. And those are 2 different viewpoints.
Right.
I am not going to judge, but I really like our value is in you.
Yep.
Not the other way around.
Well, and we're getting some great commentary from our attendees, and I wanted to call that attention. Tom just brought up, we're going to see issues and fallout from remote workforce over time. Culture and training will suffer, and that's actually something that I'm struggling with at BusyWeb right now, because I have 16 employees, 23 including contractors, and we have an office. I'm sitting in it right now. We're in Champlin. And we used to have 12 people in the office and we were bursting at the seams. And now it's more like 4 on a regular basis. And sometimes only 3 of us are here. What I'm wondering and thinking, and I think we're going to see this over the long term, we're going to start to see a little bit of a backswing where people want to connect with the companies that they're working for and they want to come back into the office because they're feeling isolated, they're feeling lonely. And so one of the concerns and one of the things that I'm setting up internally at Busyway, we kind of head that off, is we're going to have collaboration days at the office where, yep, go ahead. If you want to work from home, that's great. As long as you're meeting all of the things that we need you to in the business. But let's get together once in a while so that we can tend to the culture, so that we can keep hanging out. There's nothing like actually being face to face with people to get that personal bonds that you need when you're actually working with folks. Right. So this is all big, and it's going to be a big difference. Just shout out to our participants. I'm going to turn on microphones in about 7 minutes. So if you have additional commentary that you want to bring in, let's go.
Lori, what do you think of that fallout? Issues and fallout?
Yeah.
I don't disagree, but I feel like it's important to know thyself.
Mm-hmm.
I love my hybrid situation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm physically in the office probably 3 days a week.
Yep.
And then I have that beautiful option as well to work from home. Somebody's coming over to exterminate or repair the water heater, etc.
Right.
But I do really resonate with what Dave was saying. And I think Tom typed in that, just being able to be here and be with our team and have face-to-face is lovely, is great. Even today, my boss said, "Oh, we should get some snacks. We should get some treats. Like, because we're having a team meeting this afternoon." And I said, "That's a great idea. Let's do it."
The nature of it, the nature of the get together changes.
It's very nice.
I did a post on TikTok not too long ago. I talk about the same subject on TikTok, and I got really smacked by I got a lot of reaction to it. And my contention was this was actually early after, we shut everything down and started to come back out in a different way. And I said, we should probably stop talking about going back to work or things going back to the way things were, because that has never happened. Mm-hmm. Evolution doesn't happen that way. You have moments of change, and certainly we go forward, but it's not just that the cat is out of the bag and that your average professional in the fractional world can now take 2 hours of commute time and use one of it to go to the gym and get healthy. Mm-hmm. Can take another hour to read in the quiet of their living room or backyard to feed their brain and their soul. Mm-hmm. The cat's out of the bag on that, and that's hard to return to. Quite honestly, some of that behavior has been the province of people really high up in corporations. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so you sort of get a taste of this, but my point, and I got all this like, well, I've been working through the pandemic and everybody should go back to work and we should just go back the way things were. And it's not just the cat's out of the bag. Evolution has a funny way about it. When you get to a new state and change happens in a dramatic state, you're there. You're at the precipice of change. And it's not just the sort of the simple argument that once we had the car, we never went back to the horse. It's just change creates a new reality. So I think culture and training, Tom is right. It will suffer, particularly if you look at it through the lens of how we used to do things. But at the same time, it is going to grow and evolve and accept, just like these other big moments, big tectonic plate in the shift of how things are. Yes, what was is going to suffer, but the beauty of what is, what's coming, it's so wonderful. It's like it's the car era now. It's all in front of us. We get to define what that is. I'm super excited about what it means for culture.
I love your optimism. That was poetic. That was beautiful.
I'm a history. It's history, right? Like, hey, listen, once we had a phone, we didn't go back to, we got the iPhone. We didn't go back to Blackberries. We got the Blackberry. We didn't go back to landlines. It's just, we evolve, and there's some loss on evolution, and there's some gain on evolution. I think for some reason in the work culture, we maybe hold on to the loss a little more than get excited about the gain. What do you think about that, Lori?
Yeah, Yeah, I think that might be just part of the hardwiring of our brains.
Mm,
Those of you that are into neuroscience,
yeah.
that, speaking of evolution, our brains are designed to scan for threats
Mhm.
more than we're scanning for pleasure and reward. We are scanning for pleasure and reward, but to
Mhm.
survive, we really needed to create that brain capability to notice when there are threats. And so within that, sometimes, any one of us, even if you're positive by nature, you can feel a little more inclined or biased towards negative. And I think that's probably pretty normal, but
Mhm.
let's be conscious of it and, take what John is saying of like, well, let's embrace this change. Let's find the silver lining when we feel like we're encountering some type of a
Oh my
cloud.
God. See the opportunity.
Mm.
Just see the opportunity. It's hard, right? Because we don't know. We can look backwards because that's concrete. We can look at the way culture was. We can look at the way work was because it's concrete. We understand it. It's been kind of the same for decades and decades. It's very hard to look forward. But even then, right? Even then I can't tell you exactly what it's going to be, but I know this, it's going to be full of opportunity because change brings opportunity.
Right.
Well, just one small thing that I just occurred to me, which is a bit of a quirky benefit, but for anyone that does any type of training, learning
Mhm.
and development, a nifty benefit of being virtual is when you put your folks into their breakout rooms
Mhm.
for like a case study,
Yep.
small group
Mhm.
discussion type
Mhm.
thing, you have this really simple way of communicating. You're like, hey, remember, this is what the
Mhm.
part 2 of the assignment is. And hey, 5 more minutes. And
Mhm.
remember to pick a spokesperson. And
Yeah.
then you've got this control, which is gorgeous, which is you count them down and now they have to all return. And if
Yeah.
you do live training, you have so many experiences where it's like herding cats,
Oh my
and
Mhm.
you're like,
gosh.
oh my God, I
Yeah.
got to get
Yeah.
people to get
Oh,
their attention back up to the front of the room. I mean,
yeah.
that's like such a simple thing, but it's kind of fun. It's kind of
Yeah.
useful and,
It's exciting and
very
it's
happening.
different.
Oh, wow.
Speaking of that, sorry, Dave.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
stepped on you for a second. Lori, we talked a little bit about your book. You write books. I want our listeners to hear a little bit about what you do, what you love to do, and how you make a living, and what you love about the living you make.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I had this really interesting career ride for about a dozen years where I ran a formal mentor program inside a huge corporation, and ultimately 900 people participated.
Ooh.
And the book is really a distillation of everything I learned. And there's
Nice.
tons of stories,
Mhm.
and there's over 100 illustrations in the book. The book is funny. Of course, I had to change the names in most cases to protect the guilty.
Right.
But the stories are true. The stories are all true. And the second chapter in the book is about informal versus formal mentoring.
Mm,
Which is better? Neither's better. They're both marvelous. So
mhm.
I have a feeling just about everybody that's tuned in right now has had an informal mentor or mentors throughout your career.
Mhm.
Somebody that maybe it's situational. You say, oh my gosh, would you mind? Can I buy you lunch? I've got to run a situation past you. I don't
Mhm.
know quite what to do. Please weigh in, help me out, right? This is very powerful. That's why the title of the book is Protege Power. But
Mhm.
if you're searching for a mentor, I go into quite good detail and even provide you a scorecard of what you should look for in a mentor that's the right mentor for you right now. And then
Really?
importantly, what's the hat that you wear once you have secured that person's interest in
Awesome.
your growth and success? So it's very do it yourself. Honestly, Dave, John, I should be selling the book through Home Depot. It's so DIY.
It's just DIY.
Completely. You do not need to wait for like, oh, I need a formal mentor program. What
Mhm.
the heck? Like those are so rare. They're
Yeah.
very rare. So no, do it yourself, bootstrap it, and unleash. I mean, each one of us, I'm sure, has had just this incredible transformative piece of advice
Mhm.
or really like deep
Oh my God.
coaching
Yeah.
that somebody just disrupted you and just said, Dave, do you realize blah, blah, blah?
Mhm.
Dude, stop doing that. It's going to be career limiting. I mean, I've had that hundreds of times. People just
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Lori, do you realize like that is career limiting? Don't do that anymore. And I go, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
You got to be coachable as well. So
That's a big thing.
my
You know,
pitch.
that's a good one. So the book is Protege Power, Amazon and
You can get the audio version on Amazon and the
Okay.
Kindle version on Amazon or other platforms as well, where the digital books are available.
Mhm.
And then if you are someone who enjoys a hardcover
Yeah.
book, then you can get that through my website, which is protegepower.com.
wonderful.
And
Love
there
it.
you go.
There it is.
So
So
let's open up to everybody else. I want to add Nicole, who I met recently and who is awesome at being a fractional and a marketing exec. And then Tom also is with us, and he's a sales executive extraordinaire. He's been a guest on the show. So I'd love to hear your feedback if you guys would like. You don't need to, but if you'd like to chat, you now can. So what do you feel about mentoring and finding a protege, and maybe even for conversation, who's your favorite mentor that you've had so far? So would love to hear some of that. And I'm going to throw this
That's
out.
John or Dave.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to say, like, John's one of my mentors, and we
Dave's
bounce
one of
things
mine.
back and forth over stogies once in a while, on the lake
Mhm.
once in a while, and we get a chance to just lay it out. I mean, I just met with a guy earlier today who runs an agency very well out of San Francisco, and very similar to mine, but we can just talk and he can say it straight. In your family, your friends, your employees are all a little bit biased. So
Mhm.
having unbiased opinions can be incredibly helpful. So
Yeah, that's
love any feedback from-
Nicole, have you ever had a mentor?
I have. Yeah, I love this topic so much. So
Oh, good.
I have a mentor who has been in my life now for 18 years, probably.
Woo!
Yeah,
Amazing.
she is amazing. So I will tell you, so I started working for her company when I was maybe 2 years out of college.
Mhm.
And she was, she had a woman-owned business at a time when not many women were owning businesses. And I remember the first time I met her, like a lightning bolt. I was like, man, I want to work for her. Like,
Really?
I want to be her someday. I just immediately connected with her. And,
18 years? Did you say 18 years?
let's see, it was 2005. So no,
That's
maybe like 16 years.
amazing. That's 17
Anyway,
years.
yeah.
That's
She-
amazing.
Yeah. And so she has been, man, she's been an incredible blessing in my life. I've learned so much from her. So when I first started working for her company, it was only 7 years old. Like I said, woman-owned business. I think there were maybe 16 employees.
Mhm.
And now, believe it or not, I actually just saw her. I went to the beach this last weekend with my daughter, and she happens to have a second home there. And I just happened to just text her, and I was like, "Hey, are you here? I'd love to see you." And we've just been able to maintain this really great relationship over the years, and got to see her this weekend. And she's just always been such a great sounding board for me. Now her company has 60 employees, and she's
Oh,
just
wow.
really successful. And I just really look to her because just as a leader, she's just been a fabulous leader in my life. So
And
yeah,
you don't work at her business right now. You're
I do
independent.
not. No,
You do
yeah.
not.
In fact, actually, she's a client of mine, believe it or not. So I used
Okay.
to be an
Excellent.
employee
Yeah.
of hers, and then she approached me several years ago and said, "Hey, we'd love to have you help us out with our marketing. Will you?" And
Mhm.
so we've been able to stay connected. We still get to work together, so it's pretty
Okay.
awesome. Yeah.
So this is the opportunity side of things I like to get at is, Nicole, you don't drive into her office, and yet mentorship is there. Right? You
Yes.
could probably live in different states, and yet mentorship is
Exactly.
there.
Mhm.
It's so exciting that I hope, first of all, it's what a wonderful blessing to have a relationship like that. That is awesome. And, but I hope this is kind of the way the world goes, right?
Yeah,
Like
I think I'm super excited about it. I think the way that the world is now just opens up so much more opportunity.
Yeah.
And I love, Dave, how you're being really intentional about training and collaboration with your team. And I think that's what's going to help companies be successful, is just to be really intentional about making sure you're bringing your team together in different ways. So I think as long as people are intentional and really focus in on it, that it's only going to make culture stronger than it was before.
And Nicole, are you a fractional CMO? Is that your world?
That is my world. I live and breathe it. I love it.
When did you start?
Oh, I started my business a month before COVID.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
Brilliant.
good time. That's a good time.
The perfect time to do what you're doing. Right?
Yeah.
It actually did. We grew a lot. We
Yeah.
had just started just before COVID. We grew a lot because of that. So,
Yeah.
well, That's super exciting. Nicole is talking about, I mean, the spirit of mentorship, right? Mentorship doesn't rely on a building. It doesn't rely on a room. You know, it sounds like it only relies on a text chain that you can continue to activate.
Yeah.
You know, that's so awesome. Lori, what do you feel about that?
I feel like good on you, Nicole, that you've selected a mentor with a beach house.
Yeah. Genius. Yeah.
Genius. No, but it just goes to show that if you can cultivate a deep, trusting relationship, this person obviously is able to be a sounding board for you at different junctures because they know you. They
Yeah.
know you, and you know when you bring a situation to your mentor, she will weigh in honestly, which is one of the themes here also, is we want to invite honest feedback. I just don't know of anybody. I mean, I worked on Wall Street. I worked in network television in New York, in the music industry, and then in corporate and international, and been to Japan. And I have not met anybody who's successful that got there because they were just naturally gifted and polished when they came out of the womb.
Yeah.
It's really applying that sandpaper that people who care about you can apply with your permission to help you see what you don't see. It's that quintessential, somebody's all dressed up at the fancy black tie event, strolling across the ballroom floor, and everybody's looking at the toilet paper that's attached to the bottom of their shoe, right? But they don't see it. That's kind of like how some of our behaviors are in our professional life. We don't see what other people might be distracted by. And that's where I think a mentor or hiring a coach can really be just turning point for you to open yourself up to that.
Speaking of that, Lori, do you coach still as well?
Yes, I do.
I thought so. That was kind of a leading question. Talk more about that for a minute.
Well, just generally on career and how to pivot and bring more innovation to your career. And for women, it's still that eternal quest for work-life balance, so I have some good messaging on that. Plus, I'm a comedy improviser. So sometimes I get hired to come in and look at how can we take a few principles from the world of improvisation and bring it into selling.
Yep.
Work culture, right? Yep. Listening skills, that sort of thing. So
yes, and yeah. Oh.
Dave, Dave, you go.
No, I was just adding yes and because
yes and there's
good.
Speaking of that, there's an interesting sort of theme afoot, with mentoring and how it goes, but sort of a sub theme I think to how it works really well is I think there has to be some openness to being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And the new normal, I hope it has, and maybe Tom and Nicole, you can throw in this, but I feel like the new normal has allowed people I have actually a little permission now because the world is so different and so upside down and the future is so undetermined that I can be vulnerable. I know in my corporate career and the people I worked with, we're corporate, very hard environment to be vulnerable in, very hard, frowned on. Don't do it. Pressure. It just didn't fit. And I feel like we've been given permission to be vulnerable. And what a gift that is if you're going to be a mentor or mentee, because you have to be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And we have permission.
Everybody's yearning to be included, to belong, to have your place. And each one of us has so many layers and, complexities, nuances. So how about Tom? We want to hear from Tom. Tom, thank you for introducing me to Voyager U and to this effort with the webcast. It's so much fun.
Yeah, good.
Sure, my pleasure. I forgot about that. I forgot that. I know that we had met some time ago, but I forgot about introducing you to Voyager U. So I'm glad it's working out. Just a couple of thoughts. I spent most of my career working from home. But also in and out of the corporate office. And that's where, like you just mentioned, the inclusion And especially for newer or younger employees, I think that's where one of the challenge will be as far as working from home, building that team spirit, that inclusiveness. When everyone's separate, I think it's going to be more difficult. And in my comment about leadership and training, I see some of the gaps in that. We all talk about lead by example, but if you're not visible, you can't lead by example, or as easily, I should say.
Right. You have to over communicate.
Exactly. And one of the biggest gaps that I've personally found is the teachable moments that I know from my days where, I'd go back to corporate, and, I think I've told this story before, they set me up with a guest office, but I'd always ask for one kind of near our customer service group. And so I'd be sitting there doing my work, and I hear the conversations that our team is having amongst themselves and with customers. And there's times I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I come run out of my office. I'm like, okay, not that I was intentionally eavesdropping, but I heard you guys just tell a customer X, Y, and Z. A better way to communicate that would be to say this. And so you can just do that 30-second, it's a teachable, coachable moment. And I think those are the things that are going to get missed as we go more and more remote.
Oh yeah.
I think they'll get missed. I think they'll change. I think they'll come up in new ways that we just haven't quite realized yet. Tom, let's go back to the youth there for a minute. That's interesting. There's the millennial generation. They hunger for mentors, and particularly now in a remote world, like, who am I going to learn from if they're not at the office? How do I learn on Zoom calls? How do I learn at coffee shops? How does that happen? It's been written. Harvard Business Review did a story on it not too long ago. It's like, are we going to miss an opportunity to mentor up the younger generation if in this new normal? And I don't know who has the answer to that. I mean, the answer, like most in a new world, is going to form. But it's interesting, Tom, that you say that, because I suspect that if I gave you 5 people to talk to, Tom and I have met before, by the way. So if everybody listening, I know Tom and all that. And so I guess this is a little bit of a juiced thesis here. But if I gave him, I'm sure you'd buy him coffee and you would just love to help him. And they have that spirit of mentorship, unless you tell me no, and then I haven't really sized you up as well as I thought I did.
Absolutely. I think the one of the things that I've seen with the new generation is that they crave feedback.
Yes.
They almost maybe overbearingly crave feedback. And so that presents another challenge, that if you're not in close proximity, if you're not able to, stay on top of what they're doing and how they're progressing, you may miss, just some of the smaller, hey, nice job. I saw you did this, nice job on that. Or, that some of the smaller, as you'd say, John, the snack size pieces of feedback might kind of go missing, due to proximity.
Right. Well, and how do you collect input and feedback from a world that is reduced down to the size of a screen, or maybe even an itty bitty little screen? It's the same thing if you try to actually work from like an iPad instead of your computer, or God help us all, if you have to do the phone to like take a couple of business meetings, you're through this itty bitty little window. And I think that's why there's a lot of feedback need, because I'm in real physical space. And when you're interacting with people in the world, you can pick up on a lot of nonverbal cues and or pick up on culture that you might not have otherwise soaked up. So how do we replicate that in a world that certainly has given us the opportunity to be much more flexible in our work-life balance, but in a world that sometimes you just can't meet with people in person anymore? And so how do you forge that piece? I love that, Tom, that we're talking about how the feedback needs to go. How do we expand that to actually bring some of that wider perspective, more color into where we're going?
I think you're exactly right. I mean, another example is, if you're sitting there in an office, you see somebody walk in and they're dragging and they're down. It's like, oh, looks like you're having a bad day. What's going on? How can I help? You won't get any of that remote unless they offer, unless they, text you or dial you up or whatever,
Right.
and hey, I'm having a real bad day today. You're going to miss those opportunities for outreach.
Mhm.
If they're available. So this, Lori, I'd like you to comment on this next thing, because I'm going to drop a big turd on this whole idea that as if to say that if culture is good, then everything we just talked about can take place. If culture is not good, and for a statistically larger percent of the population, people report culture is not good, all of that stuff that we just talked about doesn't exist. And I'll give you an example. A place where mentoring, if you hate where you work, if there's power struggle, if it's a toxic work culture, 62% of the people report they work in a toxic work culture. So if that's the reality of work culture, what is the chance? What is the chance for mentoring? What is the chance for collaboration? What happens? I think we have this duty to sort of envision, yeah, we would have to repair that in order for any of the good old days to take place in the first place.
Mhm.
These are some very real things. Like, I get it, right? It would be great if we could, but if most people think they work in a toxic workplace, if I work in a toxic workplace and I think somebody at my office is out for me and just negativity all over the place, I'm not really motivated to help anybody.
Right. Well,
And I don't feel like I'm being helped by anybody. And I think I can cite some data, but it has not been good. Do you know that 72% of the people report that they actively don't give a shit about their job?
Oof.
18% actively work to tank the company they work for. So it's not like the full-time in the office workforce is this unicorn panacea of career joy, right?
No, you're absolutely right. I would agree. I would
Yeah.
definitely agree.
Yeah.
Because people can be actively disengaged. My recommendation, if you find yourself in that spot, would be seek out a mentor in the new industry or
Yeah.
company that you'd like to move into. And if that feels like too much of an alpine
Mhm.
slope for you, like,
Mhm.
what? I'm not even there yet. Then I would say, if you are not on some type of volunteer committee, activity, planting trees in your neighborhood, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, etc., get on one.
Mhm.
There's
Or make one.
wonderful, or create one. There's so
Yeah.
much wonderful research on what is sometimes termed weak ties.
Mhm.
In other words, your next opportunity probably isn't going to come from your BFFs and your siblings and your first cousins, because
Mhm.
you know, like, so many of the same things,
Mhm.
same people. But the next concentric ring out, or the next concentric ring out of you being present in your community or your faith practice, etc.,
Mhm.
that could create a mentoring opportunity, an informational interview, just something to get you to widen the aperture. And I know, again, that's not easy to say, not necessarily easy to do. I'm sure you have a
Mhm.
long to-do list like all of us,
Mhm.
but it's worth it. You got to just branch out, I think, and just create some new circles for yourself.
Ooh, that's a big deal. So Dave, to your point about at an office, right, with 12 people in it or 16 employees, is I think the opportunity in front of you as a business with employees is, yes, you can work and innovate on how you sort of embrace and foster culture, and you will, because I know that's the kind of thing. But if just with the understanding, right, they're going to do just as good outside of here with other mentors and other communities and other activities. And some people don't feel like they have the agency to pursue that. I think in the new normal, it's almost
Yeah.
going to be, people are going to demand it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the tendency, some people's tendency is to be more private. There is the classic introvert extrovert, right?
Yep.
So
Mhm.
extroverts are, COVID was the worst case scenario for extroverts because they couldn't be in person and chit chat and hang out with people. It's kind of the opposite for the introverts and the folks that need that quiet and that solitude in order to process and to make things go. They were in their houses. They didn't have somebody coming up to them and talking about TPS reports over their shoulder. They just were able to do their work. Right. So, it's a tap dance, it's a balance. And
Mhm.
our goal, and I'm a weird spot, but as fractionals, we all fill that role of leaders anyway. So as leaders in our organizations, when we're having those conversations, we need to have coherent conversations that kind of talk about all sides of the spectrum. How do we acknowledge and keep our employees from leaving by fostering culture in new and creative ways? But conversely, how do we nurture those people that need the love on both ends of the introvert extrovert spectrum, and young and old? That's why I think, of course, I think I'm brilliant because I'm Gen X. We were brought up in that chasm between the boomers and the millennials, and so we translate. That's our thing.
Well, I think to your advantage, Dave, and Lauren, maybe you can touch on this. The fact that you're thinking about it that way is really important. Is how can I give people nurturing, and how can I set them free? Not everybody thinks like that.
Yeah. I agree. You have job openings at your firm, Dave.
We
Getting
do
a lot of applicants.
always. Yeah.
It's a rolling thing. So, is there anything else that you can tell us about Protege Power, like the big idea for people to take away?
Yeah.
Talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So each one of you have really good gut instinct. And right now, with what you want to achieve and grow in your professional life, if there is someone in your sphere who appears to have mastered those things that you need to work on, get up the courage to ask them if they would be willing to mentor you. When I was running the formal program, I always interviewed at least for a half hour and sometimes 3 different 1-hour calls, each incoming mentee. And one of my questions I would ask is, do you have anyone in mind that you would like to be your mentor? Right? I mean, I'm a good matcher, but I want them to weigh in. 100% of the time, if that incoming mentee named someone and I approached that person to be their mentor, they said yes, number one. And number two, it was very fruitful mentoring relationship. So that's what I want to say is trust your own inner compass, gut instinct. And it does take courage. It is a sales job. You need to sell yourself. And I would say, tell them what you admire about them and that you comprehend you need to cultivate this in yourself, right? And make your case and find someone, maybe an accountability partner, a peer-to-peer mentoring relationship that you can role play and sort of test out that pitch with each other so you get the wording down. And it could just start with an informational interview and ask them about their career. A lot of people enjoy reflecting and talking about their story and how they ended up where they are. But that's what I would say. There's a spot in my book where I say that, and I put the words in there. If there's nothing else that you get out of this book, remember this.
Yeah.
Ask.
Huh. Well,
Ask.
good point.
It's probably going to be yes.
Yeah.
You know?
90% of life is just showing up, and it's always the simple steps first. And I think we tend to overlook that. What's interesting is that point you said about it, the person who they would like to mentor with 100% of the time said, yes, please do. There's something about this idea of mentoring and this nature of it, where it allows some real authenticity to come through. Some real human engagement, and regardless of how we work, right, in a big building with thousands of people or on Zoom meetings or something in between, that is probably hardwired into our DNA, apart from the logistics of how we work and where we work is like this beauty of, well, I guess it probably is, right? Because if back in the caveman days, your line wouldn't live very long if you didn't show the next generation how to catch a fish, how to make a hook, how to do all that stuff. It probably is hardwired into our DNA. I never thought about that way. Is that in your book? Am I spoiling a chapter?
It's going to be in the next edition. It's basically like it's transmission of knowledge, how to, whether it's real practical or just some of the things we've touched upon, which is philosophy and ethic and honor, honesty, integrity, generosity, connection.
Does anybody on the call follow Gary Vaynerchuk? Gary V. He was here at VCon. He had it in Minneapolis. He's what would we call him? We would call him a prophet of some sort in the new normal, I guess, is one way to look at it. He's got a great past. He had this good post this week, and he said, everybody thinks they got to go to school and get the hard skills. The most important skills you're going to have in life are the soft skills. And isn't that interesting? Is if we sort of, I'm going to go get, and I'm not knocking education. You have to learn all the time, but time spent on soft skills is time well spent. I've had to talk some people down off the ledge in the last couple of years. Like, I don't know what to do. The world's changed on me. I think I'm going to go learn how to code, because I think the world needs coding. I'm going to go get it. And I said, do you want to code? No. Do you know what coding is? I've got no idea. I come from sales, or I come from finance, or something like that. Well, then why do you want to go code? Because I think, look at it, right? The market wants coders. Like, well, do you consider yourself a gear, a cog? Or do you have a little something more? And the point of that is don't forget your soft skills. Right. Don't just lean into those because God, I think they're underserved. And this idea of mentoring fits right in there, right?
Right. That's all about building interpersonal relationships, right, Lori?
Yeah. Cultivating more of our emotional intelligence, or EQ. We hear that term, along with IQ.
Yeah. That's I think that's where we got to spend our time and energy.
Well, let me throw that out though. I think developing your EQ will also be more difficult remote.
Yeah, 100%.
Tom, we're gonna get a cage. We're gonna have a cage match between you and I. We're gonna both put on things between remote, not remote, all that kind of stuff. It could be, again, I would say yes, it might be, and it also might be a great opportunity for it to form a new reality.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked remote now for, it's probably been over 10 years. I've been in either a fully remote position or one day would go into the office. And I feel like if the culture's right and the leadership is good and there's trust, that emotional intelligence, you can still grow, because if you feel trusted and there's transparency, then when there's an issue, you'll bring it forward, you'll talk about it, you'll feel safe to share, and you'll be able to build those relationships and have that emotional intelligence that you need.
That's a good point. That's often what I say is the ultimate manifestation of a fractional professional is you're going to come in, you're going to do your thing, right? Marketing, sales, whatever your skill set is, you're going to bring your magic to it. But that objectivity, you're going to come in and just, you're going to tell people what to do, not in an orderly way, but like, I have this knowledge, right? I'm going to be authentic and let it come out. And you're going to have this opportunity to guide your clients, not just take the instructions and do the thing. And that's a beautiful thing. We're coming up at the top of our hour. The book is Protege Power. The author is Lori Crever. And would you say if you're thinking about Beaver Cleaver, you can say Crever? Is that kind of how you? Yeah. I love it. That's super. That's super cool.
I want to say, Dave and John, thanks for welcoming me into the hooliganery of what you got going on here.
Boy, it went fast.
Hours.
Yeah, it did. But before I let everybody go, I do want to remind folks, if you thought that this interpersonal communication conversation around mentoring and what Lori had to share fascinating, hang on to your pants, because next week we're going to dig real deep into networking and building interpersonal relationships with Kathy Paper of Rock Paper Star.
That's right.
If you know Kathy Paper, she is an absolute firecracker. It's going to be hilarious. June 10th at 1 p.m. Join us again. Tell all your friends. And Lori, I hope to have you there as well, because this is such an engaging conversation, and it was a delight to have you with us.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Nicole and Tom, of course. And Lori, thank you for being our guest today.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, everyone. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
And with that, office hours is it for the week. Dave, we'll see you next week.
Yep. See you next week, everybody. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, John. Bye, guys.